Hi everyone, and welcome to day 4 of our special edition of Human Centered on location at South by Southwest 2022. I'm Nick Brunker, a Group Director of Experience Strategy at VMLY&R, your host for the show. Thanks for tuning us in. We've been so fortunate over the last few days to have our very own Chief Experience Officer from EMEA, Karen Boswell, on the ground in Austin, bringing us some terrific updates, themes to watch, and brought in some amazing guests to share some unique perspectives as well. Today is no exception to that. She's just wrapped up her 4th and final day at South by before heading back over to London. So we're excited to catch up with her again. Plus, very excited to welcome in Andy Wardlaw, who's the Global MD Talent Business Lead, and he's specifically focused on innovation. So what better way, I think, to round out a weekend of where we've been talking human empathy and improving the human condition than actually bringing somebody in who is focused on human talent. So Karen, I guess before we dive in, let's give our good friend Andy a chance to introduce himself. Andy, welcome to the show. Thanks again. And tell us a little bit about your background.
Great to be here. Thank you. So I am privileged that I get to work with, advise, coach, and sometimes connect some of the best talent that the creative industries has to offer. My focus, I guess, I would say, is quite broad, but it's innovation leadership across a wide variety of businesses, increasingly diverse actually, including brand owners, media owners, agencies of all different focuses, strengths, startups, scale-ups, technology businesses, and the talent that drives those businesses forward.
We're so glad to have you. Thank you for carving out a few minutes of your Monday to chat with us before everything wraps up down there in Austin. Karen, kind of break it down for us today. Day 4, what were the big things that you took away from today?
So the main thing and the main conversation that has been happening a lot is about talent, which is why I kind of hunted Andy down and asked if he would join us today. We've gone around a lot of the talk tracks and spoken to a lot of people and just talking about who's here this year and how their audience has changed, what people are looking for and what they want to take away from it. It's sparking a lot of interesting conversation around the war on talent and, how much people have changed over the last few years and what this new era means to everybody and how we bring new and better mindful ways of being into seeking, finding, retaining and looking after the best talent. And it's something we've talked about quite a lot as well. I don't know if you want to build on that before we break it down.
This is probably the first sort of main globally significant meetup in the sector that since the last 2 years of COVID. And so we've all got very, very used to having conversations, important sort of life decision conversations on the video conferencing platforms. And as much as you're able to see people when you're doing those chats and you're able to get a sense for the person, I think being here, it's really, really ratified in my mind how important physical proximity is when making large decisions. And actually, we've all had, from a person perspective, because everyone has different views, I think one of the good things to come out is that there is now much more of a hybrid set of tools and behaviors we're able to use remotely or in person. But I think it's definitely hybrid. I think that there's not a world I can see where everything is done virtually or everything is done by people behind screens. And one of the things that keeps coming up when I'm talking to talent and talking to businesses, there's probably more variables now when people are making large career decisions than there ever have been before. The need for hybrid talent is extreme and acute. Across all of my clients and all of my partners and businesses that I work with, everybody is saying the same thing. They can't find the right people. I've actually seen some bad decisions being made, either from a career perspective or a very, very large cross-regional move somewhere where somebody hasn't been able to do the proper due diligence. One of the other themes that I think we're probably, it's a big one this week, and I'm sure it's come up on some of the other podcasts, is there's a real theme in lots and lots of different talks coming up time and time again on metaverse. And so the M word. So one of the things that perhaps drives a more visceral virtual environment like that, or mixed reality environments, is the need for people to be able to relate physically, not just to an avatar or not just to something which only really gives part of the essence of what they are and how they succeed, the types of environments they need to be in in order to be successful themselves. So I'm talking to people a lot about how they do due diligence, how they make decisions in mixed proximity environments, whether they'll be able to visit the business, how much time they'll spend in the office versus traveling versus with their colleagues.
And it's interesting because you mentioned there, the M word, and this, it sort of builds on some of the conversations from yesterday, actually. Today's build on that was this idea that we have all of these multiple identities when we think about who we are in the metaverse. I've got my LinkedIn identity. I've got my Instagram identity, which is personal to me and locked, only to my friends and family. But then we have Twitter, and they're all slightly different because we've grown up, well, probably veterans of it now, but grown up in this sort of social era. And actually this idea that they are being created and curated, and our identities moving into this metaverse, is something we need to think about. And when you're seeking talent or building teams or connecting people, to your point of view, that is becoming blurry. There's lots of blurred lines. And so it's been a really interesting series of conversations, both on stage and off stage, actually, that it's sparking a lot of debate. I think there's been a lot of emphasis on the thing that is the metaverse, but then it's like, well, hang on, what does it actually mean to the people in it?
So I think people are being very, very deliberate about how they present themselves and how they're going to be successful in the environment they may choose, which enhances their career but also doesn't have a detrimental effect on their personal life as well.
So building on that theme, one of the distinctions that we've been talking about that needs to be made is, how do we put some safeguards around who we are as a professional, and how much of what is not something I can no longer leave in a physical office or even on a physical device. I have a work phone and I have a personal phone for reasons that are important to me. I need to physically put a device to one side, but we're becoming so increasingly connected. And I think combined with the pressures that we're feeling, the collective everybody's got much more on their shoulders at the moment, to your point around unicorn talent. It poses an interesting thought around how we can show up in the metaverse. I mean, do you have a point of view on maybe some tips on how we might be able to navigate that?
It's a really difficult one. It's one of the things I've seen, the talks I've seen, it's come up quite regularly. In an era where businesses are consciously trying to make more diverse environments. I mean that from a gender point of view, from a ethnicity point of view, but also from different types of creative businesses as well. How specific, or whether you need to come into a virtual environment as yourself, or perhaps how you want to present yourself in a work environment. I don't think the technology, to the quote we were looking at earlier, I don't think the technology is at a point yet where that question has been settled. And I think you put that in a career context again, going back to my thing I said about variables, I don't think people know quite how to manage that. I don't think they know how to plan for that or to make career decisions based on it.
And the world has changed, hasn't it? Like the world has changed, and I think people are realizing that, phrases like new normal don't really have a place. Everybody's now there's a lot of talk about how do we cope, actually. And it feels like it's coping rather than getting to that sort of empowerment. So I think the shift is going to be a really interesting one to navigate. And it is affecting a lot of different roles, especially in, the lens of South by Southwest, where it is technology-led and data-led. Losing sight of the people in that could become something
very
rapid,
very much so. And I think the level of understanding and literacy in businesses it widely varies. And I think there's quite often, particularly when people join businesses coming from other sectors or coming from other types of company, i.e. somebody moving from a brand owner to a service creative agency, or from a media owner to a technology business, I think quite often the same words are used to describe skill sets, experience, success, but they're translated to mean something very, very different by the business than the person themselves mean when they're talking about them. So I think when companies are, and many of them are, maybe everybody, are in periods of transformation right now and increasingly looking to hire different iterations of innovative talent, whether that's about operational innovation, structural, commercial, creative, all of the above. I think being diligent and understanding exactly the point at which you're joining the business in order to help translate that through to success has never been more important, and actually easier to get wrong if you join the wrong business expecting something completely different. I think that's always been one of the challenges, and I think now it's been exacerbated further.
What do you think that means? Sorry, Nick, it sparked a really interesting question for me there. So what do you think that means for those that are hiring, like the transparency of the business? You know, you make a really relevant point about really understanding what's going on inside a business, but quite often actually that is information that isn't readily given. So do you think there's a...
It's true, and I think there's an art to interviewing the business that you are talking to, not just allowing yourself to be interviewed. It's not a catch-all, but it tends to be the case that when companies hire, they set a rhetorical version of the business which is some years ahead of where the business actually is. That can cause quite a hard landing when somebody joins. I think there's from a hiring perspective, I think being really cadent and very specific about how success is translated by the person joining, it goes a hell of a long way to build success. There are multiple people, you know, very senior level, C-suite leaders of businesses can quite often end up bringing a version of themselves to the interview that isn't the one that turns up to work. And I think companies are very capable of doing the same thing.
Karen, your mind went exactly where mine did, which is it tends to bring up a potentially vicious, or if at best tricky cycle, where you've got companies who are trying to retain and build a culture in this new normal, to borrow that phrase, or help customers or help employees and prospective employees get excited about the work, yet this is new for them as well. So as you think about the experience of finding and matching talent into this future workplace, nobody really knows, has it all completely figured out. Tell me about some of the challenges you're facing, Andy, and when hiring managers and leaders and talent aren't quite ready yet to be at that mature level of, this is how we recruit, this is how we onboard, this is how we get people to stay. Because building culture, that's not easy in this environment.
I think that's a really good point. And I think technology in some cases has moved much faster than culture's ability to keep up. And as much as we've been, in many cases, me included, very lucky to be able to continue doing business remotely with technology, I think as a creative sector, and in the broadest sense of the word, I think we are being reminded, and actually this week, this festival is a reminder of how important physical culture is for people. I think companies that have built hybrid structures that are more dynamic and more malleable and able to work in increasingly diverse ways with people that are in the office, some of the time, managing the importance of those times and those interactions has never been more acute. And I think there's a huge retention problem across the sector, all different types of businesses, for people that have worked remotely, and sometimes a huge inclusion problem. People turn up differently. They turn up with the best version of themselves differently. Some people are very good, very effective working remotely. Others need the proximity and presence of colleagues to bring out the best of them. And I think companies having to learn new habits, new muscles for incentivizing and enfranchising people as they do try to become more diverse. And actually, if I can just make one point that I've heard talked about quite a lot as well with some of the leaders that I partner with, is that where there's been a very correct pressure to have as diverse a workforce and point of view, structure, client roster as you can, quite often people are not being set up for success. There's a danger to fall into a box ticking exercise in order to get to a better place from a diverse point of view, but without actually making sure that person is being set up to succeed. It could be they're coming from a completely different business, from a completely different way of being successful. And I think doing the work early on brings out much better outcomes for both parties.
Which brings nicely to my kind of final point in this section, actually, which is I I was lucky enough to be on a panel with our colleague Amber this morning, and we talked a lot about data and instinct, and actually instinct and your gut feeling being a source of data. And it's hard to trust your gut when you're hiring someone you've never met. And it's hard to trust your gut when you're meeting a potential boss, and at senior levels, you're making a commitment of several years quite often.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? And it was a really interesting debate around, just allowing for the psychology and the sociology to be a form of data that we take into consideration.
So. Yeah. And without really specific training, I think for leaders across businesses, understanding or continuing to learn how to do proper due diligence for the benefit of the person being interviewed or for the company that you're partnering with. It doesn't always need to be about people, but it's companies joining together and working in different ways as well and partnering. I think understanding how to properly measure the match, why this will be successful or why it won't be successful. I think people do go a lot on their gut, or they go on a set of questions that they use time and time again. I know that some businesses have very, very, very long, very structured, quite drawn out interview processes. Others don't. Both make bad decisions, both make good decisions sometimes. And I think having a really, really tailored, as diverse as possible, but to get to the best outcome system for meeting people and interviewing people and getting the true version of themselves and how they're successful is a huge challenge, very important right now.
Andy, so great catching up with you. I think this has been such an awesome conversation and a great way to round things out. What we've been doing the last few days, and we'll kind of do it again here, is go through our question of the day, our quote of the day, and then close things out with a theme of the day. And I guess, Karen, we can kind of ping pong back and forth with the three of us on the discussions and the answers to this. But what was your question of the day for this final day at South by Southwest?
So the question of the day is, when we are talking about that sort of creating and curating of our identities in this new blended world, how do we prepare for that identity divide? That was a big question posed today. I do not have the answer for that. We'll kind of revert back on it, but good question.
And I think going back to the metaverse context, I think that the gap in knowledge from people who are genuinely working in building it and rendering it and setting up technologies that will keep it proliferating and getting better, versus most of the rest of us, it's a pretty big gap. And I think where technologies have been in place before that are mixed reality, I think they've either ground to a halt or gone down a road that doesn't bring many people with them. So I think obviously this isn't just something that's just turned up, but the number of things I think we need to think about as we build it, or should we build it in certain ways. Don't want to be dystopic about it, but I think it's a really interesting friction. Whilst we're all, most of us anyway, really enjoying being back with people physically, we've probably got the most advanced system for being with each other virtually at the same time. Maybe they can both be good. Maybe they can both be mutually enhancing.
Which brings us on to the quote of the day, which is got some really big long words in. So I'm going to take more for South by Southwest. Well, we'll give this a go. So the quote of the day came from a talk on exactly this, specifically considering the role of people in the metaverse. The real problem with humanity is we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology.
That is a mouthful. There's a lot to unpack there. We could definitely unpack. I mean, I do think it's interesting though when you talk about that last piece of godlike technology, and again, probably getting too profound with it, but the amount of things that we can do and will be able to do over the course of even the next year. Just think about where we will be when we reset and do this all over again next year at South by, which I hope we can do, by the way. Is that evolution of technology for good? And I think that when you look at it the way that you worded it in the quote, that's a pretty rough question. And I know we've talked dark patterns in the past, and it's been a topic of conversation, no doubt, but I think it's super interesting to think about, especially as we think the humanity of somebody's career, like literally their livelihood. How does technology impact that? It's a really profound question.
Yeah,
it is. One of the speakers actually addressed that, and he said that he's somebody building the metaverse, and he said that perhaps we can help bridge the gap between Paleolithic emotions with the right metaverse or with the right environment, which I guess that's an optimistic way to look at it.
You can have the right technology in the wrong hands and the wrong technology in the right hands, and you just don't know what's going to happen, do you?
Well,
Amen. Amen. What about the theme of the day to round things out?
The theme of the day is a bit left field, actually, but I kept hearing this word, so it would have been remiss of me not to bring it to the forefront. Ungendering. Ungendering is the theme of today that has got people talking, and that is present in the fact that we are seeing the toys for girls and the toys for boys not being a thing anymore, that unisex clothes are becoming more prevalent. You don't have stores are starting to have just general sections rather than a ladies section and a men's section, and that's sort of happening in lots of different places, and it's really sparked a total mix of points of view on that, which we won't go into, but I think that theme of ungendering is not something I had particularly noticed explicitly outside of perhaps unisex bathrooms. But yeah, on that note.
Very cool. I mean, what a few days it's been. Andy, thank you for taking time to be our final guest of 2022 on the South by Southwest on location front. Really appreciate all of your insight and your time. Safe travels back home.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
And Karen, just a great set of days. I mean, what a ride it's been over the last handful, and I'm so thankful that we were able to do this podcast. And I think that we should maybe when you get back to London on the ground, maybe middle of the week or something, reset and do a review, a weekend in review, if you will. So if that sounds good, we'll put it on the books. And just again, thank you for the idea, and thank you for doing this. What a great few days. We really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Very happy to do that. I think it would be good to soak up the culture and what's still buzzing in a few days' time. So yeah, I'll speak to you on the other side of the pond.
Sounds great. Safe travels. And thank you all for listening to Human Centered as well. These special editions live from South by Southwest 2022. To learn more about our CX practice and our approach to the work, you can check us out online at vmlyr.com/CX. Thanks again for listening. We will see you next time.